Hey everyone, as promised, this video will be all about J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in Their Eye. And in this first video I'll give you a brief summary of the novel and also tell you why it's one of my absolute favorite ones. If you want to skip this part, you can go straight ahead to the second video in which I will discuss the relevance of Catcher as well as give you a personal review of the novel. If you want to skip that part as well, you can go straight ahead to the third and last video in which I talk about the evolution of Catcher as well as the narrative voice in Catcher, which I also discussed for my second master's thesis. If you want to read my master's thesis, you can do that by clicking the link below in the description box. I had to exclude the appendix and some of the direct quotations from the typescripts that I've used because I'm not allowed to publish them. So that's gonna make it a little less coherent, but I hope you enjoy that anyway. So let's get started with a little summary of the novel. In the first chapter of the book, we find out that Holden Caulfield, the main character of the book, was sent to a rest home or a mental hospital where he's currently undergoing therapy. He doesn't want to talk much about his life, but he does mention having an older brother, DB, who is a Hollywood writer, and then he begins his story about his breakdown, which started after he left Pensy Prep, where he failed all of his subjects except for one. Holden makes clear that he was never really able to connect with his fellow students, and so he doesn't really feel sad about leaving his school. Before he leaves, he wants to go say goodbye to his history teacher, Mr. Spencer, and he does that, and after that he returns to his dorm room. Holden's neighbor Allie comes in and annoys him a little bit, and then soon his roommate Stradlater also comes in, tells Holden that he has a date waiting for him, and while he shaves, he tells Holden that his date is Jane Gallagher, and this is a girl that Holden knows and likes quite a lot, so he gets a little bit worried because Stradlater is a bit of a player. And so they talk a little bit. Holden tells Stradlater why he likes her. They used to play chess, and she kept all her kings in the back row because she liked the way they looked there. But anyway, Stradlater leaves, and Holden starts working on this assignment that he was going to complete for his roommate, Stradlater. And he doesn't really know what to write about, so he ends up writing about his younger brother Allie's baseball glove, on which he wrote poetry. We find out that Holden's younger brother Allie died of leukemia several years ago, and that the night he died, Holden broke all the windows with his bare hands and slept in the garage. And here we're given a bit of a hint of where the breakdown process, which is a long process, actually started. When his roommate gets back, he reads the essay and he gets a bit annoyed because it doesn't really have anything to do with the assignment he was given. Holden asks him about his date and he refuses to talk about that, so the two get into a fight and Holden attacks Stradlater. Holden decides to sleep in Ackley's room, but then he wakes up in the middle of the night and he decides to leave for New York that night instead of waiting until Wednesday. He wants to walk around the city a bit until his parents have had time to process the news of his expulsion before he heads home. Arriving at Penn Station, Holden takes a cab to the Edmond Hotel and he asks the driver where the ducks in Central Park go when the pond freezes over. In the hotel, Holden goes to the nightclub, the Lavender Room, where he dances with a few older women, and then finally he takes another cab to a nightclub called Ernie's, and again he asks the cab driver where he thinks the ducks go when the pond freezes over. This cab driver gets a little bit angry, finally drops him off at Ernie's, and when he's at Ernie's, Holden remarks how all the conversations around him seem very phony and depressing. Finally, Holden leaves the club after seeing a girl that his older brother used to date. Back at the hotel, the elevator operator Maurice offers to send Holden a prostitute named Sunny. Holden agrees, and then finally the prostitute arrives, but Holden gets really nervous and he doesn't want to have sex with her, so he pays her half of the money and asks her to leave. Of course, a little bit later, Maurice and the prostitute come back, and they demand the other half of the money. Maurice ends up punching Holden, and Holden imagines himself as this movie character being shot. The next morning, Holden calls Sally Hayes to set up a date with her. He goes out to get some breakfast, he buys a record for his sister Phoebe, and then he decides he wants to see Phoebe. So he goes to the park where she hangs out, and he asks a few kids. One of them tells him that she might be at the Natural History Museum with her class, but then remembers that that was another day. Holden decides to go to the Natural History Museum anyway, and he goes there remembering his old class trips. He finally meets Sally, they go to see a play together, and Holden gets annoyed with all of the actors, and then afterwards he rants to Sally about his school and all the phonies there, and finally he insists that they run away together and live in a tiny cabin, and that they would be happy together. Near the end of the conversation he insults Sally, and then finally he leaves without her. Holden meets up with a boy named Carl Luce who used to talk about sex all the time on the playground, and Holden wants to talk about sex with him now, except Carl doesn't want to, and he tells Holden that he should undergo psychoanalysis. Having almost no money left and wanting to see Phoebe, Holden decides to go home. He sneaks in because he doesn't want to wake up his parents, but it turns out that they're not home anyway. He finds Phoebe asleep in his brother's room and he wakes her up. He has to explain to Phoebe why he got kicked out of school again, and then she asks him what he wants to do with his life. And to this he answers with what is referenced in the title, with the lyric, "If a body catch a body coming through the rye." The actual quote is, what he wants to do with his life is this. Anyway, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff, and what I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't know where they're going, I have to come out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I'd do all day. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really like to be. Phoebe points out that Holden misunderstood the lyric. It's actually a poem by Robert Burns, and it goes, "If a body meet a body coming through the rye." Holden finally tells Phoebe that he's gonna go away for a while, and Phoebe lends him some money. Holden calls a former teacher of his, Mr. Antolini, and he's invited to stay at his house for the night, so he goes over there and they have a long talk. Mr. Antolini feels that Holden is headed for a terrible, terrible fall. Finally, after this long talk, Holden falls asleep, and when he wakes up in the middle of the night, he finds Mr. Antolini stroking his head. He feels that this is a sort of sexual advance that Mr. Antolini is making towards him, so he hurries out of the apartment. The next day he goes to Phoebe's school and he writes her a note asking her to meet him at the Museum of Art so that he could give her her money back. Phoebe shows up with a suitcase and asks him if she can come along with him. Holden tells her she can't and tells her that she has to go back to school, but she refuses, and so he ends up taking her to the zoo. I believe that when Holden watches Phoebe on the carousel ride, he sort of realizes why he can't be a catcher in the rye, and that this is probably the reason why he decides to go home in the end and seek help for his mental breakdown. This is the quote where I think it sort of becomes apparent. All the kids kept trying to grab for the gold ring, and so was old Phoebe. And I was sort of afraid she'd fall off the goddamn horse, but I didn't say anything or do anything. The thing with kids is, if they want to grab the gold ring, you have to let them do it, and not say anything. If they fall off, they fall off. After this, Holden promises Phoebe that he'll return home, and he refuses to talk about what happened next, but we all know that he got home and then he sought help. And that he's telling his story from this mental hospital where he's now at. I think this last passage from the carousel ride is a very important one. It's one that's not often discussed when people discuss The Catcher in the Rye and discuss Holden. I think it really implies that Holden realizes he can't be a catcher and that you have to let kids fall off a cliff for a ride, metaphorically, if you want them to grow up, and that you can't take on that responsibility of trying to prevent anything bad from happening to them all the time. So this was my summary of the novel, and now I'll quickly tell you why it's one of my favorite books of all time. It was actually the first English novel I'd ever read. My brother had to read it for a high school assignment, and he was a lot older than me, so he had the book on his desk, and I was about 12 years old. And I kind of wanted to prove to myself that I could read an English novel, as well as talk about books with my brother. So I started reading it, and of course I didn't really grasp it fully. I think the vocabulary was a little bit tricky for me because I was 12 and English is not my native language, so it was a little bit tricky. I did really enjoy sort of the natural flow in the novel and the funny dialogues and all the witty remarks, because Holden is a very funny character. So I read that in about 2 weeks, and then I wanted to reread it, but my brother had to return the book to the school library. So then I started to search in local bookstores for a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, and I couldn't find any, which is odd because the book has never gone out of print, but apparently in our town it had, and it was very difficult. I couldn't find a copy anywhere until, of course, I got to high school, where they still had that one copy in the school library. So it's a silly and nerdy thing, I guess, but The Catcher in the Rye is the only thing I've ever stolen. And this is my high school library copy. I still have it. It's a little bit worn, but it's been reread several times. And it's still my favorite book. So if anyone from my high school is watching, I'm really sorry. I know it was the last copy, but I promise no one has ever loved the book more. A couple of subscribers had sent me a hardback copy and a paperback copy, and these are great, and I love them, and I love having a collection of Catcher in the Rye novels. But of course, my high school library copy will always have to stay with me. So this is one of the reasons why I love The Catcher. It's a book that sort of introduced me to English literature, and, you know, it's a pretty great first book, I think. Alright, so that was it for this video. I hope you liked it. Leave me a comment and tell me why you liked it or why you hated it, and when you first read Catcher, if this was your first time, or if you read it when you were younger for high school. In the second video, I'll talk a little bit about the relevance of Catcher and also give you a personal review, sharing some of the other reasons of why it's my favorite novel. And you can skip that part, like I said, if you want to go straight ahead to the third and last video, in which I talk about the evolution of Catcher and the narrative voice. So if you want to do that, if you want to check those out, that would be great. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you very, very soon. Peace out!